As a Jewish woman, I assume this was your first trip to Israel. Was it?
I had gone on Birthright after I knew I was doing this film. I was lucky enough to have done the Birthright trip.
Okay. What does a visit to Israel mean to you? I mean, what did it evoke in you?
It was mostly when I was doing this film that I really got to connect to it. It was the first time I felt home and an identity. I felt it was the first time that, it's like, even just being in the airport, knowing the majority of people around me were Jewish, I felt comfortable. Like, I just let this huge guard just went down, and I automatically felt more open to God and for things to happen in my life. And you know that you're a part of a heritage. You have a family. It was the hugest thing for me to realize that I'm not alone, you know?
Mm-hmm. One of the motifs in the film that you raise is that of David and Goliath. You know, and it's an interesting discussion. I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's show the viewers your finding about David and Goliath, and then let's talk a bit about that. Please, let's see that now.
I think that every nation, every people, probably have some sort of legend that leads your way, maybe in some countries hundreds of years, and in our case 3,000 years. And our legend is the story of David and Goliath. It's amazing that almost 3,000 years later, if there's one story that influences today, unknowingly and unconsciously, the people, the nation of Israel is that story.
So this was your finding, David and Goliath. You found this throughout the culture?
I think it's part of the heartbeat of Israel. I mean, the story of David and Goliath, for those that don't know, David was a young boy, I think early teens. Goliath was a huge giant from Philistine, and they wanted to take away all the Jews. And I think it represents one, like Israel, being David, is very, very small, and they're fighting off this huge giant, which is like, there's a saying, this land is your land, this land is my land, from enemy border to enemy border, and it's like Israel's completely surrounded, and that's like the big giant that they're always fighting. And then there's the other part of it where Masada, for instance, you go back in history, was where all the Jews were there, and they were again trying to be washed out, and it's Israel taking its stand now. What that story means to Israel now is never again will they let this happen. Like, now they finally have their land as they say it was promised to them, or we say it's promised, and it's never again to let that happen.
See, the interesting thing is in popular modern media, since the Six-Day War, there's been an effort to turn it around so that it casts Israel as Goliath and its neighbors as David. And there's been an effort to characterize that. So I think that's what you're reacting to, what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. I think that Israel now has its ground, and it feels a lot more powerful, and it's now able to stand up to the bigger guys, I believe. I mean, that's my take on the story.
Yeah. One of the things you raise in your documentary is the multicultural nature of Israel. Talk to me about that.
I have to tell you another story about that, because it's something that just blew my mind away in Israel. Another misconception with Israel is that people don't understand it's multicultural. Yes, it's a Jewish state, but it doesn't mean that it's only for Jewish people. Like, there's huge historic and religious significance for Christians, Jews, Muslims. And we were interviewing Shimon Saboni, who's like a famous cantor, and we were on the Mount of Olives. And so the Mount of Olives overlooks the old city. And above us was it was a road. And so it was almost like a 3-level thing. And when we were interviewing Shimon, I was just sitting there watching, taking everything in, and I looked behind me, and there's this huge Christian tour bus that had just unloaded, and their leaders and the priests were there, and they all just started to do a prayer, and they were looking over the old city praying. And then there was us interviewing a famous Jewish cantor, and he was singing a song at that time, which was somewhat of a prayer. And on top of that, it blew me away, it was Ramadan. And so below us, at the wall and by the mosques there was thousands and thousands of Muslims bending down, praying, and I thought that was the most beautiful thing, because for Israel to be seen as not so open-minded, it had the 3 biggest religions there praying in peace. Where else do you see that?
I had a similar experience when I was in Jerusalem. I wasn't there at Ramadan, but I was there on the Sabbath. And it was a Friday afternoon, it was pre-Jewish Sabbath, and Muslims were praying Jummah prayers. And then the rabbis were gathering because sunset was coming to pray at the wall. It was just an amazing experience. And the Christian tour buses were coming through. I agree.
It's the fact that it's all in peace. I mean, where else can you see that? Any other, where... I don't want to get into anything serious, but I thought it was beautiful.
Well, the other thing about the multiculturalism in Israel is the people came from so many different places. So my experience when I was in Israel was you have newspapers in Ladino, which is a kind of a Spanish dialect, and you have German newspapers, Yiddish papers, and Hebrew. There are many, many cultures within Israel itself. This which creates a richness you talked about. I think you cover in your program.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the future. Part of your documentary talks about the population, some reality around population, around what's going to take place. Fill me in. What's taking place in terms of population growth?
There's a big problem at hand. I don't know how well it's being dealt with up until now, but Israel is the one true democracy in the Middle East, and a democracy means that everybody gets a vote. And because it's multicultural, and the fact is that Arab citizens are producing babies faster than the Jewish citizens, and they seem to think that in about 20 years there will be more Arab citizens than there are Jewish citizens, and so what is supposed to be a Jewish state will now... It's possible that it could be run by an Arab leader. How Israel decides to prevent that, I don't know. I mean, birthright, Jews can go to Israel like that freely, so I don't know what they're going to do, but it's a big problem at hand.
But is it not the case that the Arab population that lives in Israel, Arab Israelis, tend to be fairly well integrated in the community, or are they not?
Fairly well integrated, very peaceful.
So it shouldn't be a major issue, should it?
No, but you never know. Sometimes you want your own kind running your country because you may feel that they understand you better. I don't know, but it's an issue at hand. I don't think that they want to take that risk to find out.
No, understood. Why is the birth rate so low with, or tends to be low with the Jewish community in Israel?
In Jerusalem is much more religious, and so it's typical that the wives will be having about 10 to 12 children. But the rest of Israel, like Tel Aviv, for instance, is so free and so open. I describe it as it's very young, and nowadays, like the way the world is going, people don't want to have as many kids. They want to focus on career, and that's the same in Tel Aviv. I describe it as it's like New York City on Miami Beach.
Dizengoff Square on a Saturday night after the sun goes down, right?
Yeah.
Amazing.
The nightlife is amazing. Everything about Israel, and then everyone is coming in. A lot of immigrants from Europe, so it has like this really amazing, beautiful European Mediterranean feel to it. But it seems like a lot of people, just because it's an Israeli place, they're not super orthodox. So 1 or 2 children are enough for them. This is my take on it.
I think you may be correct. Yeah. Look, when we come back after the break, I want to talk to you more about the military aspects too, and religious freedom. We'll be back.